Let's go through the papers in a bit more detail. Jason Reed is the UK lead at Young Voices. Jason, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie.
Before we get on to Greg Wallace, let's talk about these new milestones from Keir Starmer. The analysis inside the Times this morning is that Starmer having these new, that they're calling them targets. I don't know what adjective we're going to use to describe basically some pitches to the public. The negative knock-on effects of them, what are they, and do you think they're right?
Well, the government is sort of 4 or 5 months after the election, scrambling around for purpose, and probably should have had these targets ready to go before the election. Perhaps could have worked out some of the issues through the system before this point. But a lot of the targets strike me as being relatively basic, things like the NHS target of 92% of routine operations completed within 18 weeks. This is a target that's been around for years and years and has just fallen by the wayside because the NHS has been underperforming for so long, and so we've got this strange system of government now, which perhaps Keir Starmer is following in Rishi Sunak's footsteps, of these top-down targets, of these big headline figures about things we're going to do on the NHS or on immigration, and then trying to build policy off the back of that. I think it's probably the wrong way round. You probably should be implementing the basic reforms that the public sector needs, and then making the system as efficient as it can be and as effective as it can be off the back of that. Otherwise, you're going to find a lot of obstacles along the way.
Yeah, those obstacles. I mean, do you think there was sort of a mismanagement internally in the Labour Party as to what they wanted their priorities to actually be, and then what in the first 4 months, let's say we've been now, they wanted to achieve, to already be telling us that we're starting on this, rather than constantly, and we've talked about this on this programme quite a bit, for how long can you keep blaming the previous government without just getting on with fixing the problems?
It's a good point. Well, to be fair, we had the last Conservative government blaming things on Tony Blair almost right up until the very end. So perhaps we've got another 14 years of Labour blaming things on the previous Conservative government. But nonetheless, they, as you say, they should have been better prepared. I think a lot of this, unfortunately, has to fall at the feet of Sue Gray, Keir Starmer's now ex-Chief of Staff, who before the election was supposed to be in charge, as far as I can make out, of Labour's policy platform and preparing for government. And it doesn't seem like a huge amount of that was going on, which means we're now in a position where Keir Starmer is the Prime Minister, but doesn't appear to have a great idea of what he wants to do with the position he's in. It is welcome, I must say.
Sue Gray is just the endless scapegoat, though, isn't she? It's got to be bigger than the entire government's sort of legislative agenda wasn't sat just on her shoulders.
That's true. And to be fair, in the government's defence, there is a lot of undoing of things that they need to do. There's a lot of just getting things back on track before they can do any sweeping reforms. They need to fix the foundations, as I'm sure a government minister will say on Times Radio at some point today. But there's a huge amount of quite basic stuff that they need to be doing. And to be fair to them, they do have some new and interesting things in this set of targets, which hopefully will improve. A new renewed focus on house building, for example, promising to restore the target of 300,000 homes built per year, 1.5 million over the Parliament. Still much less than we need, I think, but at least there's a bit more emphasis there, which was scrapped towards the end of the Tory government. And so perhaps we will see some positive change in some directions, but there does need to be a bit more of a sense of urgency, I would say, behind this government's agenda. At the moment, it seems to be just playing for time.
I think that's partly what they want to try and do on Thursday. Let's talk about Greg Wallace. The comments that he made on this Instagram video that he published over the weekend, and you wonder what conversations did or didn't happen with his team before he did that. He has claimed it is only, I am quoting here, middle-class women of a certain age who've made complaints about his alleged sexist behaviour. I mean, what did you make of his sort of intervention over the weekend?
It's really grim, isn't it? I cringed a great deal watching this bizarre video he's released. If you think about what are the most important jobs in the world, perhaps you'd think emergency service workers or something like that. I think Greg Wallace is making a compelling case that PR advisors are some of the most important functions in society to prevent this sort of thing. I think Greg Wallace would do well to do a bit of reflecting and not be releasing any more videos anytime soon. Go and reflect a little bit. But it seems that he thinks his position is he's done nothing wrong, and he thinks that there is, he's not said this, but he's striking a tone that he thinks there's some sort of witch hunt against him. He says that there have been, he cites, I think it's 40,000 contestants he's worked with on MasterChef over the many years that he's been doing that show in its various forms. And he says only 13 complaints, as though 13 is an acceptably low number of complaints about his behavior to have received. A lot of the complainants have responded to what he said. They've said quite reasonably, I think. I don't see what gender or class of the complainants has to do with anything when there's apparently a recurring issue with his behavior. And so we'll have to see how this investigation goes. But if Greg Wallace continues with this current stance he's adopted, I think it's difficult to see how he'll be back on our TV screens anytime soon.
And a challenge for the broadcaster, because, when just yesterday, the BBC was still heavily advertising their MasterChef Christmas specials that are coming up. Obviously, Greg Wallace is co-hosting that. The BBC began a review of workplace culture at the end of last year. That was particularly after what happened with Hugh Edwards. I just wondered, stories like this, do they impact the perception of the BBC at large, or just about Greg Wallace? Are they two separate?
I don't think they are separate at all. I think it definitely does impact perceptions of the BBC, especially, as you say, because it's not the first time that this has happened. It's not the first time that there's been a very high-profile story where people viewing the story have been thinking, well, why didn't the BBC do something about this sooner? Especially because in the case of Greg Wallace, it seems like this is not the first time complaints have been made and concerns have been raised about him. And it seems that there is a culture within the media more broadly to just brush these things under the carpet rather than confront them head on. And it's one thing when a private company does that, but when the BBC does that, which is supposed to be a public service, which we all feel we're sort of stakeholders to in a way, it hits just that little bit harder, and it makes it even more difficult for the BBC to restore its image as what it should be, especially when we've just recently had an increase in the license fee. We've had another round of cuts to BBC output, and so the BBC has got a lot of work to do if it wants to restore trust.
The licence fee goes up, I think, £5 next year. That will be as of April. Asma from Times Radio Breakfast was a contestant on Celebrity MasterChef. She'll have her say at 6 o'clock, so make sure you stay with us for that to get sort of an insight of what it actually was like being on that programme and working with him. Now, big news overnight. Joe Biden has pardoned his son, Hunter Biden. He said his case has led to a miscarriage of justice. I was just looking at some Democrats. Brett Bruin, who's come on this programme a few times, said, Biden lost our party this election. He's now lost us the moral high ground. Do you think he's right?
Well, I think certainly this is something that is going to be very difficult for Democrats to justify. Joe Biden is obviously at the end of his political career and certainly at the end of his presidency and feels he's got nothing to lose by doing this. But the Hunter Biden scandal has been a thorn in the side of the Biden presidency from practically the very beginning. And so it makes it very difficult now for the Democrats to, as your guest says, to take the moral high ground against 4 years of Donald Trump, who will almost certainly push the rules, push the boundaries in various ways, and try to do things that haven't been done before in the name of his populist political project. When Joe Biden is flagrantly using this power to bail out his own son, it does make it more difficult. But it's worth saying that I think practically every president that's been in office in my lifetime has used the pardon power that they have, an extraordinary power, for some kind of personal or family or friend benefit. It's an incredible, very interesting clause in the US Constitution, this. I'm quite glad that we don't have anything like this in our system, because it's so obviously open to abuse.
Yeah, even the honours system causes, total uproar here, and this is not anything like the gravitas. And Joe Biden had previously promised he wouldn't use that power to benefit his family. He said that even earlier this year. We're going to be hearing more from the US shortly. A couple of other things I want to ask you about before our time is up. New MPs. There is a group of new MPs. I think I probably know what you'll think about this, Jason, but they have been demanding a more family-friendly day in Parliament. So Parliament should stop sitting during the evening, hold some debates remotely, and have Parliament sitting from 10 till 4, so for 6 hours rather than 8. Are they being work shy?
Well, I wouldn't want to use that word, Rosie, but I think that MPs have a very important job to do, let's just say. I think that they need as many days in the week as they possibly can to do that. I think there are lots of things we can do to make the lives of MPs better. I think we should probably pay them more so that we get the very best people dedicating all their time to it. I think they should have bigger staff budgets, probably more security in this day and age, but working less is not the answer, in my view. I think this is totally the wrong direction to be going in. We've already got all kinds of different interests, all kinds of different bills lining up, queuing up for time that people want to debate, that people want to push through to make change in their limited time in office, and reducing the number of hours and the number of days that they are working per week is not a good idea. And you can see how some other MPs who have been around for a while, been around the block a few times and been in the Commons for multiple decades, feel a bit put out by this, that you've got young people, young MPs coming in and saying, oh, this is all rather too difficult, isn't it? Can't we make it a bit easier? Well, it's a very important job. There are only 650 of them in the country for very good reason, and they should apply themselves to their job and hopefully appreciate the office that they're in and the power that it has.
Jason, thank you. Jason Reed, the UK lead at Young Voices, going through the papers with me this morning.